Okay, so this video is a request. I feel like a bit of a DJ, but instead of spinning cool tunes, I'm a giant nerd discussing 2 minutes of cinema. So this little clip by request is just a recap of the opening credits. And if I have time, I might just address the last 20 seconds of the film at the end. But you know, because I've done some mad flexing, that I studied at Sydney University and was one of the first students there to go through a cinema major. And so that means I've watched a lot of movies. No, my parents weren't proud, but I watched a lot of movies. And in all those movies I've watched, I've seen a lot of films do really interesting things with their opening credits. I've never seen any of them do something as unusual as The Truman Show does, which is to say that there are no opening credits for that film at all. The credits are for the mise en abîme. It's completely meta-cinematic. The opening credits that show up for us are for the fictional Truman Show. It's for Christoph's Truman Show, not Peter Weir's Truman Show. And that is incredibly unusual. You may remember that in class I mentioned a few times when films have fallen apart or casting decisions have fallen apart because of arguments over the billing, or directors have had to be really creative about what they do in the opening credits because stars have fought over who is going to get top billing, which is to say the person whose name comes first. For this film, Jim Carrey would have had to have been happy to give up his right to having his name as first billing, and he was an emerging star, especially in comedy at the time that this film was made. And he could have commanded about $20 million to star in this film, although he didn't. He accepted a pay cut at $12 million to be in this particular film. They also waited a significant amount of time to cast him in this film. They had to delay production for a year so they could acquire him, but they did. And so with that in mind, you know, that his star was rising, that he could command that kind of salary, to then completely forgo cinema credits is huge. And I think it would have been really interesting to see the conversation that would have happened with the production company about why there would be no credits. I think it speaks to what the film was trying to achieve, that they got somewhere, and that's the way that the film went, completely removing opening credits for Peter Weir's The Truman Show and replacing those with the mise en abîme, the film within a film, the meta-cinematic credits for Christoph's The Truman Show. So that serves a really particular function. So what we end up getting is we get some credits that say Hannah Gill playing Meryl Burbank. And of course we know that even within the names of those characters, that they're all references to old world Hollywood, very much stars who often got their fame in mid-century, but certainly Hollywood icons. So we immediately have that reference to Hollywood stardom, and that's all dragged in for a particular reason. You'll remember that a lot of the street names also have allusions, the park names have allusions to famous directors, to famous Hollywood families. So why do this? Well, I think one of the important functions that those opening credits serve is positioning us, the viewer of Peter Weir's The Truman Show, as voyeurs. We watch Truman for a significant period of the film the way that the audience would watch Truman. And certainly at the midpoint of the film, those layers are stripped back, and I think our position changes. We certainly get a much greater insight into the role of the moon room, that liminal space that filters what happens, certainly controls and orchestrates Truman's world, but then filters that and filters and controls what the real world sees. There is a shift in our experience then, and we're invited into that liminal space, and just the full extent of the artifice artifice that is hinted at in that opening credit scene is fully realized by the time we get to the conversation with Truman on the bridge, where Christof is feeding Marlon dialogue, which is revealed in that J-cut audio transition. And of course, the filmmaking artifice that goes into reunifying Truman and his father, trying to extract that degree of emotion, that degree of pathos from the home audience. And we know that involves lighting, it involves special effects, it involves music, it involves all those things. So it's important then for us to go back and actually look at, and I'm just pulling this up so I can read it for you on my phone because I'm jazzy like that, what Christof says in those opening credits. So this is how the film begins. He says, "We've become bored with watching actors give us phony emotions. We are tired of pyrotechnics and special effects. While the world he inhabits is, in some respects, counterfeit, there's nothing fake about Truman himself. No scripts, no cue cards. It isn't always Shakespeare, but it's genuine. It's a life." Now, of course, as we go through the film, and in those examples that I've just mentioned, pretty much everything that he says there is taken back. He feeds him dialogue. We find out that certain episodes have synopses. We can see the control and the maneuvering. So this idea that these things are happening in any genuine capacity are really undone. And of course, this all heightens the cruelty of what is happening to Truman. It heightens the lie that people are being sold. And it also heightens Christof's elevation of himself as a false god. And I think it's pertinent to point out that sure, there's the layers of deception that are happening to Truman. He is deceived. And we find out that all these people in this world, Hannah Gill, who plays Merrill, is an accomplice. Louis Coltrane, who plays Marlon, is an accomplice and quite a heartless one at that. The two closest relationships to Truman, they don't like him. And I think when we see Marlon quite willingly hunt him down with all those illusions, specifically the visual illusions to Auschwitz that are happening, we realize just how counterfeit Truman's world is and how cruel this experiment is. And I always want you coming back to just how cruel these things are. This is a cruel experiment. And, we're getting to that point where no one's asked any moral, ethical questions. For all these people that love Truman, the irony of the shirts that say love him, protect him, and that no one seems to be doing that in this world. We really just have Sylvia who's asking those moral and ethical questions. And occasionally the technical crew, as things get really precarious, when Christof is willing to kill Truman to preserve the entertainment value and to preserve his creation. And I really think it gets hard to talk about that as coming from a place of love. I think it comes from a place of him trying to preserve his position and preserve his authority, and him desperately trying to hold on to his role as a what they call him, a televisionary. So we get positioned as voyeurs. The borrowing of all those tropes of documentary with the talking heads shows us that these two actors have drunk the Kool-Aid. I think they do believe that they're doing something altruistic. And again, they use this opportunity to tell us that this is real, that it is genuine. And this is the third time we get to hear that message of how genuine this is, that, nothing is fake, as Marlon tells us, that it's all just merely controlled. But it's a bit more than merely controlled. It is very, very controlled. It is very manipulated. We've got Christof as this Svengali-like figure, really orchestrating all his movements. And again, I think that high-angle shots with all the saturated color after Truman's disappeared, where all the extras are there in the town square at first positions, is alarming in terms of the degree of orchestration that takes place in this world. And again, it shows us just how many people are complicit in this deception, and that this deception takes place in the name of entertainment. And again, we talked about that satire. I mean, I think that first position shot is a lovely example of satire that you could use in an essay on satire. But it goes back to Peter Weir's message, where he's asking us to start thinking more about what you watch, start asking moral and ethical questions, start thinking about the saturation of media and what that is doing to us. Start thinking a little bit more about the artifice and the tools of media and how that has an impact and control over what you think and feel. I mean, in this day and age, in the 21st century, media saturation is at an all-time high. Can it get any higher? Can we get any more connected? Can we get any more feeding of media into our lives than we already have? What the future holds, it really is a brave new world. But I think we land ourselves in this world with these opening sequences. We have three people try and remind us that the world is true, authentic, genuine, which of course is a very postmodern concern for those of you who are interested in postmodernism. One of the big questions that postmodernism asks is, what is truth? This idea that truth has very many shades, that more than one thing can be a genuine experience. And, this search for authenticity that we have is a very very key idea in postmodernism. So you do have that happening, and for those of you who want to deconstruct that further, that is there. But as these opening credits go up, we become very aware of the artifice of Truman's world. We become very aware, even just through the sheer costuming, that within Sea Haven, so you've got the techno noir of Christoph in his moon room, and then we cut to the two actors, Hannah Gill and Louis Coltrane, talking about their characters in the show. But that is very much a harking back to a mythical representation of America's past, and it was the American dream that was sold to everyone, and that people were convinced that they could have, but very few actually achieved it. But that is the world that they choose to create, and we begin in there. We meet Truman for the first time in a moment of quite cute, childish innocence, playing an adventurer. And of course, this is one of those important things that we come back to, because this is Truman. That is the one real thing, that one consistent thing of Truman that exists. When he comes out and delivers his very sitcom-esque catchphrase, like a Steve Urkel or Dynamite from shows of the 1980s, when he comes out and delivers his good afternoon, good evening, and good night, his catchphrase, that isn't Truman. I think that is a crafted Truman and a response that's been dragged out of him and expected. But the adventurer, we can trace that all the way back, and we do through moments of flashback and through moments of montage that come later in the film. So our first introduction to Truman is catching him in this very innocent moment. I think we can talk about him as being an archetypal innocent. We've certainly talked about him as being an everyman, but we get that in those lovely little opening close-ups. But you need to be thinking about how you see him in that moment. And of course, we see him through the bathroom window as a voyeur, that meta-cinematic frame that happens. It reminds us that we're watching a film. So we're watching how the Truman Show is made. That's how we're positioned. We're not seeing the world from Truman's perspective. We are seeing it as an observer, as a voyeur, and there's this hint of gratification that we get from watching Truman occupy that space. So we need to be really aware of that. And then on top of that, we need to be really aware of what is being controlled. And we know that the control extends all the way to the weather, to traffic movement, to the actors taking their cues to elicit certain responses or to control Truman. So I didn't get to the end of the film. I can do another little clip on that. But do take the time to pay attention to the opening sequence. It is a very unusual opening sequence, and that first 2 minutes of film is actually really important and sets up a lot of the core messages of The Truman Show. So I hope that helps. Ask away if you have any questions. Adios.